Hello and welcome to Sacred Mindshift Circle. I'm your host, Dahlia Deborah Donald. Joining us today is Dr. Patricia Baker, a leading expert in ancient medicine and healing environments. She's currently working as a high school history teacher, and she has a deep knowledge of Greco-Roman healing spaces. Dr. Baker brings unique insight into how the ancients understood the therapeutic power of nature. Her research explores how elements like gardens, water, fresh air, natural light were intentionally integrated into sanctuaries and public baths to support physical and spiritual well-being. Through her work on sensory archaeology and biophilic design in antiquity, she sheds light on how ancient cultures created environments that aligned the body, mind, and spirit, offering wisdom that still resonates today. Hello, Patricia. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Dahlia. How are you? Thank you very much for inviting me onto your podcast. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you so much for coming. So before we begin, I always ask everyone when they, come on the show, how did you begin studying this topic? What made this topic interesting to you to, write papers about it and spend so many years in investigating it?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. But essentially, I wrote my PhD looking at medical care in the Roman army on the Rhine, Danube, and British frontiers. So I was very interested in Roman medicine and how they treated wounds and their overall understandings of the body, which relates to the four humors. So yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, and blood, and all of that. And so there's I could explain that in a lot of detail, but essentially they thought the body was made up of those four humors. And what affected the body was health and illness was when these humors became out of balance. And so if you have too much heat in your body, like a fever, they would look, is it a dry fever, a wet fever? And then they would cure with opposites. So you would want, if it's a hot and dry fever, you want cool and moist foods and cool and moist environment to balance out your humors again. But part of that also was looking at the surrounding environment. What makes the surrounding environment healthy? So I've been working on the medical treatments for a long time. And then one day I was teaching at Virginia Tech for a while. I did a teaching exchange. And while I was there, the office I had this beautiful picture of the Roman Livia's villa at Prima Porta. And this villa in Rome, it was supposedly owned by the Empress Livia, who was the wife of Augustus, the first Roman emperor. And she has this beautiful four-walled garden painting, and it's stunning. And anybody who sees the archaeological remains just goes, wow. I mean, it's just beautiful. And everything is in bloom at the same time. And I was looking at that thinking, what a beautiful site. And then I realized Romans had so many paintings of gardens. And I just thought, boy, I would like to be in that space right now because it was a cold winter day. And that actually made me start thinking about what did they think about healing environments and environments that were good for you. So that was in 2014. And that was sort of what instigated my interest in Roman gardens as applied to health. And so I started looking at images and discussions in ancient literature and also in literature on health about healing spaces or healthy spaces at least. And a lot of writers, not just medical writers, but architectural writers, historians, people writing letters, all talk about their surroundings. And it's something that has been looked at from poetry, but not really from a health point of view. People touch on it. That's not to say that nobody's thought about it. But I just thought, oh, there's a lot more that could be done here. And that's what got me interested in the subject of Roman gardens and healthy landscapes. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, pretty much. And then what did you notice about the way they looked at these healing spaces? Because obviously, I know that in the beginning they were not monotheistic. They believed in multiple deities and gods and all of this. So how did that play into their healing environment also, and how they organized everything like in a natural way for healing the body?
Okay, there's a couple things there, so I'll try to answer one aspect at a time. First of all, you're right. They weren't monotheistic. They believed in many deities. But what's interesting about the Romans, a lot of their deities are nature deities, so they're somehow associated with the surrounding landscape. So, for example, their god Mars, who we always think about as being associated with war, was also a god of agriculture. And there are other gods like Sylvanus, who was a god of forests and woods. The goddess Ceres is the goddess of grain. Venus, the goddess of love, often has flowers surrounding her. So there's all these natural elements associated with many different deities. They usually have some kind of symbol around them, but there's a lot to do with earthly fecundity and prosperity, all in relation to nature. So that's how they sort of bring the deities. That's how they worship the deities quite a bit, is also worshiping the nature. And sometimes these gardens and spaces have statues of the different gods and goddesses. Sometimes they have little altars that mention different deities, and they had a lot of celebrations to these deities throughout the year, where they actually wore flower crowns or wheat crowns or vines for Dionysus or Bacchus. So natural elements are associated with the gods. They're linked. So that's the first part. Then actually, when you're in, a lot of times when they're in the healing spaces, when they're in looking at beautiful landscapes, or in their gardens. And the Romans, their houses, at least in Pompeii, Herculaneum, sites around the Mediterranean, we have examples of gardens, usually at the back of their houses. So it's quieter in an urban setting. And then in those spaces, they sometimes have wall paintings as well to make the gardens look bigger. They're garden, usually garden landscape paintings. And then the archaeologists have found that they have fountains in there. Usually the fountains have images of deities on them as well. So sometimes you get water nymphs or tritons or some kind of water deity. And then so you have the gods, again, just brought right into that space. So when people are in there, they talk about them being quiet, refreshing to the mind, and they talk about how they are, how that really does make them feel healthy. And I think the religious aspect, even if they don't mention it, was there. It's just surrounding them. So it's it's always present within those spaces. So that those three, the natural spaces, the healing, the different deities associated with nature, and the way they make the people feel are all linked together. So you can't say it's one without the other. They're all there together. Okay. So
As far as what a typical healing space looked like, was it always near water, or was it always near a certain amount of trees, or were these spaces underground? What did a typical healing space look like?
Okay, well, there's a couple different ways we could talk about this. So first, let's talk about healing sanctuaries. So the Greeks and then the Romans, there were sanctuaries, usually dedicated to the god Asclepius. Asclepius was the Greek god of healing. The Romans worshipped him as well, and they set up sanctuary sites around the ancient world, particularly in the Mediterranean countries. But one of the major ones to the god Asclepius was at Epidaurus on the Greek Peloponnese. And that healing space, people would go there. It's in a valley, just to describe the landscape that surrounds it. It's in a valley, there are mountains surrounding it. And people who would travel to it would often spend the night, but they had to be able to get there. So they were probably able to walk or had a horse or something, a carriage, or to take them there. But then the healing space itself, the sanctuary, they had to perform. Usually there's a ritual they would have to perform before they went in. Usually it just involves like cleaning yourself, so probably washing your hands and face. Along the side, there was probably people selling votive offerings, and what votives were people could buy them. Usually there are pieces of metal or pottery, but usually they look like they're anatomical offerings. So you might have an image of an eye or an arm or a leg. Just to make a modern comparison to that, if you were to go into a Greek Orthodox church today, they usually have little metal plaques that hang on the altar, usually showing eyes or legs or feet. And that's to ask the God, in the Greek Orthodox Church, to ask a God to help heal you or to thank him. And we believe the same thing was happening there, that they would put these around the sanctuary, probably on the altar, which was always in front of the temple, not inside. They would put these on it, either thanking Asclepius for helping them, or to say, my foot hurt, there's something wrong with my foot. Can you heal it? A doctor can. So they would have those, so people could buy those when they went in. And then what would happen was when they went into the sanctuary has a number of buildings, but there's always a temple. So the temple to the god, and temples always face east in Greek religion, with one or two exceptions. And then there's a huge altar in front of the sanctuary, so people could pray or place their votive offering or some other offering on it. Then what would happen inside, now there's some debate about this, but they had a place where the people would sleep. And then the god would come to them. Asclepius supposedly came to them at night, and they would have a dream, and the dream would be about Asclepius healing them. And then they would wake up and they would be healed, so supposedly. And there are lots of testaments to this and inscriptions, and they're really interesting stories. Like, I had a spearhead in I think it's his leg, and he woke up and it was in his hand, so it was, but all this is done through sleeping and dreaming. And then afterwards they would leave, but there's probably evidence they had doctors on site, so they could get some treatments while they were there. There is water nearby these sanctuaries for the most part, because they have to cleanse themselves. But what's interesting about most of them is they have these amazing views. Okay, so if you're looking out from the sanctuary, you can see mountains. There's another one on the island of Kos, where you can look over the sea and onto the mountains in Turkey. And so there's a lot about being in this nice natural space. The ones in the city, they do have smaller ones in the cities. But in the ancient world, cities, they would have been crowded, but not as crowded as today. So they're still probably a bit quieter. You can still have beautiful views from them. You can see mountains and things, which are now obscured by apartment buildings. But so that's one healing space, were the sanctuaries. Then, of course, people would sometimes they just needed to escape the city. So we have letters, for example, from a Roman statesman named Pliny the Younger. He lived in the 1st and 2nd century AD, and he wrote letters to his friends, and he was from a very wealthy family. He had 4 villas outside of the city of Rome, so he could go to the seaside, he could go to the mountains not too far from Rome, and he also had not 1, but 2 villas on Lake Como. So this guy was wealthy, but he often says, I had to get away from the sounds, the noises, the smells of Rome, and I go to my villas where I can sit, I can read, I can rest. And he talks about hearing the sounds of the birds, hearing the sounds of the fountains in the gardens around the villas. He talks about the smells and the views. So it's all sensory, but he says this brings, and it's also, the air is fresher. They're not smelling smoke and, that you would see and have in the city. So, and he also says that even his slaves and servants were healthier in these spaces. So the idea was to get out in nature. So even if you weren't sick, and you try to get in nature. And the gardens inside the urban areas were a respite from just being out, at the market or on the streets. So you try to mimic these natural places. And then finally, if you lived in an apartment, obviously you weren't going to have a garden, but you could go to the public baths. And Romans went to the baths almost daily. It's a long process. But around most of the baths were gardens and theaters and in places where people could exercise, relax, have a bath. And also libraries are there. So there's thinking about that. And also going back to the religious element, a lot of baths, you do see references to different deities or sometimes altars. So it's all combined again. So anything else I can elaborate on, or it's a lot?
Yeah. No, well, as far as the bath, I had heard, maybe I might be mistaken, but I had heard that in the bath that they use sometimes frequency of some nature with the water. I don't know if that's true or not.
What did you hear? I'm sorry, I didn't.
A frequency or some kind of sound.
Oh, not that I'm aware. I mean, sometimes they had fountains, and then you would hear the fountains. But so some baths might have had those. But the way the Roman baths tended to work was you would get undressed, and then you would go into a warm room, and you'd start warming up. And this was through underfloor heating. They had a whole elaborate heating system called a hypocaust. And then after you warmed up a bit, then you would go into a hot room where you would start to sweat. And apparently in that room, you would rub yourself with oil and then scrape the oil off with a tool called a strigil. It looks like a blunt curved knife. And that's what they used for the most part. They didn't really have soap. There's some evidence of soap, but they used oil. It sounds disgusting, but I tried it once. It actually works. I was just curious. And it does actually work. But the point is you're sweating out all these impurities. You're cleaning your humors. And then they sometimes have pools. So you would get in the warm room might have a pool. It's usually the hot room would have a pool, and you would get in a hot bath. And then after that, you go back into the the warm room. And then at the very end, there's a cold plunge. So you go into cold plunge, you dunk yourself in, and then you can go and exercise. Well, you probably exercise first and then do the baths, but then you can go off and meet with your friends. It's a social as well as exercise. Some of them have gymnasium or palestra areas where you can exercise. And we have images of women and men doing this, and slaves are supposed to go. Children, there's evidence of children in the baths through milk teeth that have fallen in drains in certain places. So everybody would go to the baths for their health and well-being. I don't know about the sound frequency that you mentioned, but I can think of, they do have fountains in there that would sound nice for the most part. But most of all, it was just this experience of sweating your body out and cleaning your humors as well as the exterior of your body, and it's good for your health. And if you ever want to try it, there's a bath in Germany called Baden-Baden, and it's pretty much structured like a Roman bath. And I can tell you, after 3 hours, you feel fantastic. So it is a really nice feeling. So
Yeah, I've been to a spa that actually did something similar where they'd make you do the steaming and then you have to go into very cold water. And I guess it's based on these findings and this history of what the Romans used to do. Yeah. I know you wrote a paper about Asclepia. It was and it was it's now a hospital that's in Greece, right? It's a wellness center in Greece right now.
Well, I think there's possibly one nearby, yeah, but. Definitely in the ancient world, it was the one I was talking about, Epidaurus, and looking at the surrounding spaces. I know the bath at Baden-Baden that I just mentioned in Germany was built on top of a Roman bath. And then Bath in England, the site of Bath in England, there is now a modern spa right next to the Roman bath. So a lot of these places, they continue. And some medieval Islamic baths are, I know in Granada in Spain, they have the Baños Árabes, which is very much like a Roman bath, but it was just the Islamic Arabic influence that borrowed or improved upon, because medieval Islamic medicine does look at ancient medicine. There's a really good scholarship on this. And again, they even in medieval Islam, they talk about healing spaces. They might reference the Roman, but a lot of what they're saying is very similar. But rather than Roman gods, it's Allah, it's God. So, same sorts of things. Yeah. Okay.
What do you notice now as you see for example, that in modern day that they're adapting many similar practices, do you think that it's something that is trendy, or do you think that all of these influences really do provide emotional and psychological well-being?
Personally, I definitely do think they do. I definitely believe that the Greeks, Romans, medieval Arabs were on to something. And actually, I am not an environmental psychologist, but there are environmental psychologists who are now measuring brain waves. And please don't ask me to go into details because I'm not the expert. But basically what they're showing is these being outside, hearing bird sounds, looking at nice spaces, or breathing in fresh air, does something to the brain, and it does make people feel healthier, more relaxed. And there have been studies looking at people who are in hospitals who can at least see the outdoors, or have plants in the room, anything green or fresh, or at least have some association with outside, tend to heal faster than those who don't. So if you're in a blank hospital room with no outside light, it seems as if people take a longer time to heal. So there's something to this. It may be becoming trendy now, but I think more studies need to be done. I think I believe we're part of nature, not separate from it. And I think by being mixed in with it and appreciating it and being out there, I always feel healthier. When I'm really stressed out, I live close to the beach. I have to go to the sea, and I will swim in it or walk along it and breathe in the sea air, and I feel much better after doing that. And so I think there's something to it, but as I said, I'm not the scientist. But the way the Greeks and Romans would explain that, they would be saying that I'm breathing in something fresh air that would affect my humors and help balance out those humors and my temperament. And so I may not agree with the science that they used, but that's how they were trying to explain what was going on. So, okay.
Okay, well, that's very good. And then also, as far as just what you explained, the aspect of it feeling peaceful and being able to see plants and I guess natural items around them. Do you also practice this in your own home now after learning all of this? And does it affect your well, I know you said you already do the same thing, but do you implement it in your home?
Yeah, I do actually. I just I have green plants around quite a bit inside the home, and I make sure I let a lot of natural light in. I mean, it's a small home, but we just make sure the windows are open until it gets really hot, and then you put the curtains up in Florida. But do that, and then I just recreated. It's sort of a little Japanese style garden for a very small space, which has a fountain and a bell, and everybody who walks by just says, "Oh, this is really nice." So, but I just wanted to recreate it and see how it does make me feel, and it's just very peaceful. Just going, even this tiny little space. Where you can hear things, see the grasses and greens growing if the rabbits don't get them. But, I do try to practice it. And there is something very nice about coming home. It doesn't feel tight or closed off. It feels very open and refreshing, I guess.
Calming and a calming experience.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Baker, for joining me today. And for those wanting to learn more about her work or her webpage, the links are going to be in the podcast description below. And if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to sacredmindshift.com so you never miss an event or another exciting discussion. And thank you so much, Ms. Baker.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was wonderful.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.